here to introduce this talk called A More Secure Yale. The presenters today are John Gasper, who's an IAM architect from Yale, and Jeremy Rosenberg, who's the Chief Information Security Officer, also known as the CISO, and the Assistant VP for Information Technology. So basically this talk is about making your institution more secure by implementing an MFA. We can save questions till the end. There's 2 microphones here. So the presenter will let us know when there's time, or if there's time for questions, then just come up to those 2 microphones. Or actually, there's one over there too. There's 3. Cool. All right. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the intro. Where the hell do I stand behind a thing here? I'll walk over here. I'm Jeremy Rosenberg. I'm Yale University's Chief Information Security Officer. I'm joined, as I said, with John Gasper, our Identity Management Architect. We're going to talk about, well, we call it More Secure Yale, but really it's about multifactor authentication, the journey we've been on. I'm going to talk a bit, I'll tell our story, kind of how we got here, and the strategy we use to address these challenges we've had. And then John's going to go over some of the details of what we did. So first let's talk about the rise and fall of MFA. I may be prematurely falling in MFA, but basically since 2020, all accounts at Yale have required MFA. We started that in probably 2017 and eventually got every single account having MFA. Now when we launched MFA, we prioritized adoption, right? We needed to get everybody on using a second factor. And so we allowed all of these different types of second factor. Now I would come to conferences like this one and get into these heated debates about the security of any one of these things. You can't use phones, they have SIM swapping. Like there's all kinds of reasons why some of these are more secure than others. But at the time, the challenge that we had was the problem of these bulk compromises happening. People will go on the dark web, grab a giant list of compromised accounts, and then hit us all at once with them. And so we needed to put some friction in there so that at a minimum, people would have to do a little bit extra work to compromise an account. And so we allowed you to get text messages, codes texted to you. You could get a phone call and push a button to acknowledge the second factor. You could install the app on your phone and get a push message. You could also get a mobile code from the phone. We handed out the little dongles that would give you a one-time passcode every 30 seconds. We even let you print out a list of codes to keep in your desk drawer in case you forgot. And then on the end there, we also allowed these things called YubiKeys. Now I'm using YubiKeys here to sort of as a catch-all for this passkey technology. Basically just keep in your head that when I talk about the YubiKey, I'm talking about a second factor that you have to have in the room with you when you authenticate. And we're going to talk a bit about what that means in a minute. So this was great. When we got MFA everywhere, we didn't see any more compromised accounts for like a year. Like we thought we'd solved this problem. And then probably in early 2023, we started to see accounts get compromised again and started to get compromised at scale, 10 at a time. And what we realized was that eventually the bad guys had caught up with us and they had figured out how to, compromise the second factor, usually at the same time they were doing the first factor. So for an example, what we found was that they would start a text conversation with the person. So they would phish their credentials and they would also phish their phone number at the same time. And then they would start a text conversation with them. Hello, we are the Yale Help Desk. We're going to lock your account if you don't reply. We're going to text you a code. Please verify the code. Right? And so what they were actually doing was initiating a login and then using the text me a code feature. The person would get a text, they would share the code, and they were compromised. They would also phish them to get the codes that came up on the little dongles. They would phish them to get the codes that were on their mobile devices. So basically, we had to stop supporting mobile codes. So that was burned. Then what we found was that once they did get control of an account, the first thing they do is print out a bunch of the backup codes. So then they could stop bugging you. They could just have their codes and keep using those. So that was it for the backup codes. Then what we found was they would turn to the phone calls. So you could, the way the phone call works is the phone rings, you answer it, a robot says, please press any button to acknowledge your second factor, and you do it. Well, what happens is they do this in the middle of the night and the phone keeps ringing. They just, even if you hang up, they just call again and again and again until finally they say, fine, push the button just to get rid of them. So we had to disable Call Me as well. So now what do we got? We're down to the push on the phone, and these YubiKeys. And when I talk about push, there's a more recent addition to that, which is called verified push, which requires you to put in a code and stuff. I'm not going to talk about that today, but we can get into it during Q&A. That is something we're looking at. But what we're starting to see with the push, and the reason they've even introduced this verified push, is because the same thing that was happening with the phone calls is happening with these apps. We call it push spamming, right? So what they do is they just keep trying to log in over and over again. Your phone keeps buzzing. It's 1 in the morning, and you finally just approve it to make it go away. So push is smoldering. We haven't given up on it yet. There is this verified push, but it's not as healthy as it was. So what does that leave us with? Well, it leaves us with these YubiKeys. And we had been talking about, trying to roll this out at scale, but it gets a lot trickier. So in late 2023, we started to plan for how we were going to get people to start using these things. Even if they were still allowed to use the push on their phone, we would still encourage them to use the passkeys. And the idea being that if they started using the passkey on a regular basis, and if you don't know what passkeys are, John's going to go into detail, but just know that this is the phishing-resistant solution that we were turning to. At least then, if a push did come through, it would be really weird, because it's not how they're usually logging in. So that was the idea. Then we got hit with a payroll attack. There's probably other people in this room who got hit with the same one. If you were running Workday, they seemed to hit all the Workday schools and companies at the same time. They knew exactly what they were doing. They would get control of an account. They'd go into Workday, and they would redirect your paycheck to some bank they had. Now, at Yale, we did not actually lose any paychecks. We had other financial controls that caught it, but there was about 20 of these accounts got compromised all at once. It was a bit of a shock that they got that far. And this got the attention of the CFO, who I do have a good relationship with. But his big concern was, well, it would be terrible if somebody's paycheck got redirected, but Yale could probably weather that financial hit. What happens if one of the people who fall for these phishes is one of these people who have this elevated access in Workday, the folks who can authorize multi-million-dollar payments, who can change the banking information for some of our major vendors? I said, yeah, that would be really bad. we should do something about that. I remember he was surprised to learn that we actually don't always know when an account's compromised. I explained to him that there's no magic here. I mean, we ingest billions of events every day, and trying to figure out which ones actually represent a compromised account is tough. And we learned a lot from this. We started to ingest Workday logs, and we were able to create some new alerts, but it's still a moving target. And so I talked to him about this passkey solution we were starting to work with, and sort of explained to him how it really does limit it takes a lot of the human error out of the phishing compromise. And so he wanted us to push it as a mandatory solution for people in finance who were at high risk, people who had this elevated level of access. And so we launched this pilot, this passkey pilot, where we would choose people to start living this passkey life. And that's actually a pretty big step. We had already been using it internally. We had the IM team, the information security team. Again, John's going to talk about sort of the process there. But this was the first time that non-technical people were going to have to live with these YubiKeys, like if you forget it at home, you have to go get it type of lifestyle that they're going to work with. And so how do we get there? Well, we started with branding. We called this More Secure Yale. And More Secure Yale actually had two components to it. There was the more secure device and the more secure authentication. So first let me talk about the device. Why am I talking about devices? We were just talking about authentication. Well, because once you secure the authentication, you have to trust the device, right? It doesn't matter how great your authentication is. Once you've got a session token, if the device is compromised, they can just steal that, and they have access to your stuff. So what do we consider to be a more secure device? Well, it's basically, we have a laundry list of minimum security standards for all devices. But really, when we're talking about a personal laptop or a device that you're using for your everyday work, it's got to be updated. It's got to be patched so that it's not vulnerable to the most recent vulnerabilities. It's got to be encrypted so that if it walks out the door, nobody can access what's on the drive. And it's got to be protected. It's got to be running some kind of endpoint protection. At Yale, we provide CrowdStrike for all Yale-owned machines. but there's a list of endpoint protection tools that we will accept. And if you don't meet those 3 criteria, there are other things we could check for. These are the 3 we're concerned about right now. If you don't meet those 3 criteria, you cannot log on to a Yale resource with this device. Duo won't let you go through. We're using, and if I mentioned that, we're using Duo for all this stuff. Duo Desktop is the tool that's doing this device verification. So how do we get that on people's machines? Well, if it's a managed device, then we just push it. So we just pushed it to all managed devices. It's in there. Whether you're in this group or not, we're getting information on how compliant your machine is, which is actually a good way for us to check up on how well the managed workstation folks are doing. They're doing okay. But if they don't have a managed device, which is more than half of the people at the university, which is probably the case in many universities, they can download it in line. In fact, we can make them download it at the point that they're logging in. So that's what it means to have a secure device, a more secure device. More secure authentication is using one of these passkeys. So a passkey is an MFA method that uses phishing-resistant FIDO2 passkey technology. This has evolved over the years. It's getting better. It's getting to the point now where we're comfortable putting it in the hands of regular users. Why does this matter? Again, John's going to get into some of the details, but what the passkey is, it's either a YubiKey, which I meant to have one here, but you wouldn't be able to see it anyway, or it's either something that's plugged into the computer, that you are logging into. So if you're on the other side of the world and you have the username and password, there's no way for you to trick the person whose account this is into giving you that second factor. They would have to mail you this YubiKey. Now, we don't need to give a YubiKey to everybody because you can also use a smartphone. A smartphone can communicate with the device over Bluetooth, so it knows it's in the room. But basically, that's what it comes down to. The second factor has to be a physical thing in the room with the person logging in. So that's what we mean by more secure authentication. So that is the strategy. That is the problem. That is the strategy. John is going to come and talk a bit about the technology and kind of how we got there. So John, why don't you take it away and get into the details?
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. I don't know, yeah, I'll stand over here so I can see the screens. So when a user, if they don't already have Duo Desktop installed, as they're going through the normal Duo flow, they're going to be challenged or asked to install the Duo Desktop product, which is that first screenshot on the left. It's a very simple, just click it. It does the download. When the download launches, you just walk through the normal wizard like you would any application that you're installing. Once it's installed, the second screenshot there is what you would see on a Windows machine. And in this case, we can tell that our system is up to date. We have a system password set, BitLocker or full disk encryption is enabled, and that the firewall has been enabled. And the user actually doesn't even usually see that most of the time. If everything's good, they just flow on to the next step, which is the multi-factor authentication piece of it. So one of the things that we'll see in this industry right now is Passkey has a couple of different names for it. Sometimes you'll see FIDO2, sometimes you'll see WebAuthn, security key, but at the end of the day, it's all now been branded as Passkey technology. And so instead of seeing the prompt of, or when you select Passkey or security key as your authentication method, you'll see the little logo there with the security key. But it doesn't necessarily have to be your security key. As Jeremy said, it can be your phone. The key is, with Passkey technology, is that we're using asymmetric encryption, just like we do SSH. So if you're familiar with like Linux servers and SSHing and using public key, private key cryptography, it's the same technology. It's the same bank-grade, military-grade encryption that we use to protect all of our banking transactions. We're no longer relying on a shared secret of a password being stored in a database somewhere or a code that's used to generate the six-digit code that could be stolen, and then the hackers could steal and generate those six-digit codes. We're now using a public key that's stored on Duo servers, and if those ever get stolen, so what? The bad guys can't do anything with it. they need the private key that's stored in the YubiKey or stored in the phone. So our last image is if you're going to go through the security key and actually use your YubiKey, and I've got 2 of them here. When you plug it in, it's going to prompt you. In our case, we elected to use pins. It's going to prompt you for your pin. You punch in the pin, you touch the little button on the YubiKey, and then you're in. That's your MFA. I would argue it's probably the fastest MFA method out there. So I'm just going to kind of walk through a quasi-demo of what login looks like with Passkey. So this is Yale's SSO page. It's our CAS page. I put in my username. I put in my password. My end goal is to get to ServiceNow or Workday. I click sign in, and I'm taken to Duo's website. And the first thing I'm going to see instead of the normal MFA prompt is it's going to just say, checking the security of your device. And there's a little spinner that goes on for a second, and then it advances to the next screen. And in this case, it says, hold on, you need to update your Mac OS. Now, me personally, I always keep my Mac OS, my phone OS, always up to date. So in order to get this screenshot, I actually had to go to my CISO and ask him to grab a copy of the picture. So next, we know we've got to update the OS. Not every user maybe knows how to do that, but Duo gives us good instructions on how to do it. So by clicking the See How to Update button, it brings up the little page there with step-by-step instructions of how to get compliant so that I can finish authenticating. Now we can see based off of our policy that we allow, there's still time before I have to update, before I'm blocked from updating. But there are some things where we will just stop the user dead in their tracks. If the computer's not encrypted, if they're not running CrowdStrike or another endpoint protection software, they're just done. They stop, they do not pass go, they can hit the See How to Update, but they need to get compliant before they move on. In our case, we still have got some time, so we're gonna skip it for now. We click the link and move on. And I'm presented with this, this page or screen on my browser. And I have a choice to make. Am I going to break out my YubiKey? Maybe I've already logged in today once and it's already plugged in. I'm just going to do the pin touch. Or I'm fancy and I have a biometric on my computer. If you're running a Mac computer, you've already got Touch ID. You can just touch, and that's your MFA, and you've successfully authenticated. For the demo, I'm actually going to use my smartphone. Okay, so I open up the camera app. I hold it up to the QR code there, and I'm in Bluetooth range, so everything's good because I have to be. The whole part of Passkey, besides the asymmetric encryption, is that we have to be close to the machine. So I take a picture with the app, and this is what it looks like from my camera on my phone. And you'll notice down in the bottom, I have a gold little thing that says "Sign in with a passkey," and I touch that. And unfortunately, I don't have a screenshot of the next piece because Apple protects that. But basically, it's just saying, hey, follow the instructions on here, and it's do a Touch ID, do a Face ID to unlock, just like I would my iPhone, or just like I would if I was getting into my banking app and I had enabled Touch ID. And after that, it's success. I'm in. There's nothing else for me to do. Everything's great. I would then be forwarded to ServiceNow or to Workday or wherever else I was going to continue my work. You just go, there we go. So our process, I'm going to go through it for you guys, of onboarding and building this, this new experience up for users, is we first had to start with an internal IAM proof of concept. A couple of us started testing. We quickly moved from test to actually having to do production because we found all of the apps that we wanted to test with passkeys, they didn't have a test system equivalent. All the Office 365 apps, Zoom, all of those were pointed at our production system. So we quickly moved to that, and we found out that passkeys doesn't work well with the embedded browser that's used by most mobile apps. So most mobile apps or desktop apps, when you launch them, they pop up your login page in a browser that they control, not the normal native browser experience, and they don't support passkeys. So for them, we have to use the fallback method, which is a bypass code. And the bypass code is, I think it's a 9-digit, 10-digit code that usually is obtained from the help desk. Fortunately, most mobile applications and desktop applications only require you to sign in, every few months. So it really hasn't been that big of a burden for our end users. From there, we expanded the pilot to all of ISO. We brought in all of the technical people, and we wanted to validate that technically savvy staff could use it day to day. And a spoiler alert, these guys were actually more resistant to doing this than the finance users that we were trying to protect, ultimately protect. But what we found out was that it worked out really, really well. Their concerns were really like, my computer, my setup is too complicated for this, which turned out wasn't the case. It has worked well for most users. So we took several weeks soliciting and incorporating their feedback, and then we were ready to start with our Finance 33. The Finance 33 was where the rubber met the road. We asked the Chief Financial Officer and his staff give us 33 users that are going to be champions, that they're the early adopter mindset, because we needed people knowing that this might be problematic. We didn't know if this was going to crash and burn the first day or not, with the work that they do. And so we said, we need your champions, give us them, and not the naysayers and people that are going to be like, oh, that passkey thing, that Duo desktop thing is horrible. We didn't want those guys. And we were lucky we got a great group of people. And starting with just groups of 4 and 5, that's all we started with. We worked through the process of onboarding them. And the first few groups were rough. We realized, oh, these are the things that we need to accent. These are the things that, oh, they don't care about, necessarily how the technology works. They just want to know that it works. And our operations lead and IT associate really got this whole process working well over the course of, I think it took us 3 months to get all of the 33 onboarded. And so I would like to just share a little bit of the outline of their presentation to the end users. So they would start out sharing the same concerns that Jeremy addressed, that all the different MFA predecessors had fallen and that we needed to be secure. And it was really about protecting the device and protecting their user account. And they understood that. They recognized that they were a target being, financially associated people at a major research university. Then they explained what the health checks were, and they explained what they will see when it fails, the same screen we saw just a few minutes ago. And they were good with that. And then we would go through and talk to them about the YubiKeys and how they work. And then the hardest thing for them really was USB-A or USB-C. A lot of times they didn't necessarily know, they just know it was the little hole that we plugged the device into. And so that was something that we would do some research with them and figure out what the best solution for them was. Then we talked about the phones, the QR code phone experience, and that this is a great backup device to have in case you left your YubiKey that's on on a backpack or in a purse or something like that at home. You still have an opportunity to get into your computer and into your apps without having to call the help desk and either get a second YubiKey issued or get a bypass code or something else like that. We also mentioned to them that the nice thing about QR codes and the phone option is that those are synchronized passkeys. Those actually get written to your iCloud account, or if you're on Android, to your Google Password Manager associated with your account. So if you get a new phone, and when you log in with your iCloud account, those passkeys are already there and ready for you to use. They also transfer, if you're on a Mac, they'll transfer over to your Mac. And same thing if you use Windows Hello, those passkeys that you create on your Windows Hello machine can then be transferred to your other Windows machines as well through your Entra account. So, and it's at this point we let them know, no more phone, no more Duo push, no more PIN codes. You had to have this device or you aren't going to be doing your work for the day. So at that point, we actually handed out the keys. They walked through the enrollment process. With the YubiKey, we did require the PIN code, so we had to walk them through generating a PIN for their YubiKey. And I'll just let you know right now, if you don't take anything else away, use Google Chrome for this. Not everybody's a big fan of Google, but the experience is the best. Windows has the ability to set the PIN code. It's not great. Sometimes it fails randomly and nobody knows why. YubiKey also has Yubico has their own YubiKey app that you can set the PIN, but the Google Chrome experience really is the best that we found. Let me see. So then we attempted to enroll their phones. Phones are a funny thing. The Apple phones actually did a pretty good job. The Androids, because Android, it's more, there's a whole broad of Android compatible phones out there. And manufacturers have customized the operating system a little bit. Once in a while, we'd find an Android phone that just wouldn't work. And what would we do? We'd give them another YubiKey. Or if they were like, hey, I'm not putting Yale stuff on my personal phone, we would just hand them a YubiKey and they would enroll that. And with those second YubiKeys, we would often recommend, because unlike your phone, which doesn't leave us, we take it to the bathroom, we take it with us to bed, YubiKeys, would probably get lost. So we said, hey, put your second YubiKey just in your office in a drawer somewhere so that if you do forget your primary one, your backup one is accessible. And then the last point before we that finished the enrollment was to make sure that they knew that these two methods are interchangeable. Just because you usually use a YubiKey doesn't mean you can't switch over and use a phone. Or if you like to use the phone or the Touch ID on your Mac, you can also use the YubiKey. And they seem to actually understand all of this really well. Dan and Alessandra did a great job of explaining that to them. So at this point in the whole onboarding process with these small groups, they would furiously go into the system and add them to a grouper group because we've got the devices enrolled, but now we need to enforce it. So they'd go into grouper, and add the users to the group, which would sync their membership into an Active Directory group, which then would get synced into Duo. And it's at this point that Duo says, okay, you can't use any of those other codes anymore. And at the same time, we also invalidated their Enter ID tokens, which is what's used for authenticating to the Microsoft 365 apps. And the reason we did that is because we, not to get too technical, but in Entra there's conditional access policies, and we were using the legacy way of interacting with Duo, and we needed to use the new way, which is called external authentication methods. And so that requirement of having a new login token on the machine, on the various apps, it was going to pop up kind of like whack-a-mole. So one would expire maybe on their phone in 2 minutes, another one might be 3 hours on their desktop for Teams, and another one might be 2 hours after that for Outlook on their machine. So we decided we're just going to invalidate all of them now, and we'll have the users re-authenticate into their various office apps, Outlook, Teams, on their phone, on their computer, when there was IT staff there to help them if there were any problems. And then at that point, we just did the testing. And I'll just let you know, we had a 77-year-old that is in the finance team that one of the people had mentioned to me, she struggles to use a computer, but she got this. She could understand just using the Touch ID and using the PIN, or using her phone to scan the QR code and just follow the instructions. It's very, very cool. So that essentially concludes the onboarding process. And I just want to say many of them felt relieved. They felt the pressure lift of knowing that they used to be a high-value target of the hackers and that they were always worried about being phished. And now with Passkey technology, that problem, at least at this point, is not of concern. And that was a good feeling for them. So then we went on to start figuring out what do we need to do to get the rest of finance onboarded. But at this point, IAM was doing all of the support. So we needed to work with our partners like the help desk and the desktop support providers to learn about this experience and what it meant to have Duo Desktop on the machines and what Passkey technology works and why is this user calling asking me for a bypass code? Those were all things that we worked on, getting our knowledge base articles all set up. And at that point, we started rolling out to the rest of finance at about 20 at a time. And we found that that's probably about the biggest we could comfortably do, was doing doing 20 at a time. So finance has all been done. They've been all integrated. What's next? For us, we're looking at the general counsel's office. We're also looking at the rest of IT, because right now it's just the information security office. And after that, we're going to look at the medical school. Jeremy has said that he considers the medical school to be most of Yale's data security risk is associated with the medical school. And so we're actively having discussions with them about getting the more secure lifestyle. And last night I checked, just so there's no misunderstandings, last night I checked, there's about 150 users that we have enrolled in this. So this hasn't gone out massively, but if you check with us in another year, or maybe even if you're at TechX in a few more months, I'm guessing that number will probably be closer to, I don't know, what, 300? Probably 300. And I'm also hoping to start pushing it just to the general population, knowing that Passkey technology is available. So what were our challenges? The biggest challenge for us, I think, was that embedded browsers in those mobile and desktop apps don't support passkeys. So we have educated our users about using the bypass codes. When they're first enrolled, that first enrollment session, that onboarding session, they get a bypass code that's good for 3 days, so they can just get enrolled everywhere. But after that, they have to call the help desk. They get a single-use bypass code. They don't need them very often. In fact, we don't get very many calls for them at all. But the help desk staff that have been trained that they're going to get notified if this is a more secure Yale user, and only specific users are allowed to authenticate these users before we give out bypass codes, because the risk has now gone from phishing the end user to now phishing or social engineering the help desk staff. So there's only specific folks that can do that. The next challenge is that passkeys, the experience, it's an interaction between the operating system and the browser. And every browser and operating system presents the passkey experience a little bit differently. So it makes it hard to do screenshots with documentation. We just encourage users, read the prompts on the screen. It explains what to do. And again, so far has been really well received. Password managers like Bitwarden, Dashlane, LastPass, they're trying to get into the passkeys experience now, because passwords were kind of their thing, and we're actually, with passwordless, we're replacing passwords, and passkey is that solution. So they'll pop up and go, hey, it looks like you're trying to work with the passkey. Do you want me to help you with that? Kind of the old Clippy kind of feel. And we just tell our users, just click, nope, not on this site. And the good ones will just ignore it. And at that point, again, we want them to use a YubiKey, we want them to use their phone. We don't necessarily want LastPass or OnePass or Bitwarden to do the password or the passkey management there. As I mentioned before, just Android devices, sometimes they struggle. Most of the time they're good. If it's a struggle for that user because the phone is acting funny, we just give them a second YubiKey, and there haven't been problems with that. I mentioned before the Entra ID piece and just invalidating. That's what we found works best for us. You might find that it's not a big deal for our users. The first day we'll just let them know that they're going to have to re-authenticate. Or maybe you don't use Entra. If you're a Google Workspace, G Suite environment, Google has actually done a very good job with their passkey implementation. And all of their applications support it really well. A lot of schools have at least a few Linux users, and while Duo does have Duo desktop support for Linux, it isn't great. And also their support when something goes wrong with the Linux isn't great. So that's just something to be aware of. It does work, but you are going to have to drive the conversation with Duo and push them to get to the engineers for when the Linux folks have issues. Firefox, it's something to know about them is it's not on, passkey support is not on by default. You have to go into configuration to check a couple of boxes, and then it works fine at that point. And I don't know why they haven't fixed it. Maybe in the last couple of months since I've checked, they've fixed that, but initially they had not. And then finally, the last challenge for us is this passkey stuff, this Duo desktop stuff is new for our end users. It doesn't scale well because we kind of have to handhold them through. And, but as we're getting more and more staff members trained on how to enroll and getting that out to the desktop support providers, we expect that we'll probably be able to ramp that up much faster in the future. So the lessons learned that we have, there we go. We did find that we actually had gaps in our managed desktop program. And by that I mean, we were using group policies in Active Directory and Intune to make various settings happen on the machines. But when we pushed out Duo Desktop to all of the managed machines, we found that there were some that didn't have the hard drives encrypted. We found some that the antivirus wasn't working when we thought it was working. And so that has actually let us go out and proactively clean up some of the other machines for people that aren't actively participating in the more secure Yale program. The bring your own desktop stuff has not been as big of an issue as we thought. Now that may be because our finance people only use managed machines. They're not trying to log in from home. Because that's the other thing. If they're logging in from home and they're required to have a healthy machine, they have to install Duo Desktop. And that just has not been an issue for us. They have to have passkeys, which at this point they're pretty comfortable with, but they have to have it with them. So another lesson learned is that, as I've mentioned a couple of times, and this is probably the big one, the mobile and desktop apps, we didn't know how many actually used SSO, and that embedded browser issue really is an issue for us. And so we're reaching out to the vendors saying, hey, it would be really nice if you would have an app that would actually support this. And the honorable mention I'll give out is Zoom. Zoom has actually done a good job of making their apps friendly to this. The only thing that doesn't work well is the Outlook, the Zoom Outlook plugin. It's still using an embedded browser, so it still requires a bypass code. And it was so problematic that we actually set it up so that we will do verified push for our more secure Yale users that are trying to authenticate to Zoom. The distribution of the USB-A, USB-C, YubiKeys, I mentioned that a little bit. It's easy when they're on-prem. We just, somebody can go look at their desk and look at their setup and go, oh, yep, this is what you need. If you have remote workers or primarily remote workers, you need to be able to walk them through and talk them through, hey, let me know what kind of YubiKey you need, and then you have to mail that out to them. And you just have to be proactive in getting that out to them early enough that it's going to be to their front door by the time their onboarding session is scheduled. Nothing too, it's not too big of a deal, but it's something to consider. And finally, or the second to last one, I was kind of surprised. It turns out our biggest help desk calls were for bypass codes for new and wiped phones. It wasn't to ask for help with Duo Desktop or to ask for help, how do I do this QR code thing? It just worked. It's worked so well for them. And also, but occasionally they do forget their YubiKey pins. And unfortunately, when that happens, we have to reset the YubiKey, and then at that point, they re-enroll it. And so if they have their backup, they can get in with their phone to the Duo Desktop Device Manager, re-enroll the newly reformatted YubiKey, and then they're back up and running. So overall, we've had very, very few complaints. And Jeremy was just at the finance large staff meeting a couple of weeks ago, And the takeaway was they were prepared for disruption, and it has been smooth. See. All right, so just to wrap things up, our future considerations that we have are potentially maybe at some point our policy.
The slide didn't advance, John.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you. Our policy and compliance teams, if they ever deem it necessary, we do still have some more levers that we can pull. Like we can require the local firewall be enabled. We can tighten up the operating system, keeping it up to date. Right now we do 30 days, and we can shrink that down if we needed to. And one of the areas where I think I might recommend or suggest that we actually do sooner is that we can require that browser versions be updated using Duo Desktop as well. So I'm guilty of it once in a while. You'll see the little red bar that says Update Now in Chrome, the little button. And I've noticed that some people have had it there for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we can use Duo Desktop to encourage the user to update. Eventually, at some point, we plan on putting together a self-service onboarding process. So we'll have an enrollment portal for users to just be able to go in and do it themselves, have some videos explaining the whole process, and then because really the end user, they just need that tutorial on how to deal with this. They don't necessarily need it in person. So we want to work on that. Duo has a trusted device feature, which basically just means that you can only log in from a managed machine. And while I don't know that we necessarily have plans to do it, it's good to know that it's there. And for some of those very, very high-risk individuals, we can enable that on their account. Duo Desktop, the Duo mobile app that a lot of you probably have on your phones today, actually can act as a Duo Desktop agent of sorts. So it can actually enforce if you're logging into something on your phone, like I want to check my email or log into ServiceNow on my phone, it can actually enforce that my phone is healthy, that my phone is up to date, that it has not been rooted. I think that's another one it can check for. Is it a jailbroken or a rooted device? Those are all things that Duo Desktop supports that, again, we don't have plans on doing, but they're tools in our back pocket that we can break out if we need to. And then finally, the big one, the most exciting one for me, is that I would love to get us to a passwordless environment where there's no or you enter a username, there's no more password. Passkeys is strong enough that it can provide both first and second factors in the authentication flow, as well as requiring that, yes, there's proximity to the computer I'm authenticating, and we're using, again, that asymmetric encryption. And besides it being secure, it's also very, very fast. That if you have a Google account now, just go enroll. If you don't even need a YubiKey. If you've got Windows Hello or a Mac with Touch ID, you'll see it's incredibly fast to log in. It's so fast that most people don't even realize. They're like, this can't be secure. What just happened here? They're blown away, but it is truly secure.
You know, I was, while we bring up the question thing, as I was listening to that, I realized that before I was at Yale, I was at a public university, and the idea of giving out YubiKeys to everybody would have been silly. I realized how tone deaf I might have become working at Yale, especially with the financial stuff. You don't need to give YubiKeys to everybody. It made it very smooth. I don't think we're certainly not going to scale to the entire university that way. We learned a lot about using the mobile devices to get people onboarded. So that was just something that occurred to me. It's like you don't need to give out YubiKeys to everybody. I think they're $20 a piece, but it certainly makes it smoother to get started. So anyway, I appreciate all the details, John. We're happy to answer questions. It looks like there's about 5 minutes left in our time, and then it's lunchtime, so we can also chat over lunch. But if anybody has any questions, can you come up to one of these microphones so that the recordings work?
This is not super a question, but the code I wrote for PIN setting on a YubiKey in Safari shipped in 18.4, so you can do that now.
What was that? I didn't hear.
You can now set a PIN on a YubiKey in Safari
Oh,
as of
you
18.4.
can?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you for that
If there are
note.
bugs, do not file them to me. I no longer work there. Thank you.
Okay.
Good tip, thank you.
We may modify our onboarding process then.
So I just have a suggestion for the general rollout. We found that whenever we now deploy a new device, we just deploy it with a YubiKey. And so it's just all part of, here you are, this is what we do now. And that's made, it's a lot easier to plan as well. We don't have to go through department by department or training groups, or because you're already handing it over. And it's just, this is just the standard.
That is an excellent idea.
The question I had, the biggest challenge we've had is with the NFC components. And I'm just wondering if that's something, you didn't mention it, like in your help desk responses, or whether that's something that you see as inconsistent as well.
The NFC, near field communication, I didn't mention it for a reason. We don't, so one, we buy the cheap YubiKeys that don't have the NFC. My YubiKey 5 does have it. I'm pretty sure you guys don't have it, you're just plug-in. If you're special, like a CISO, you might have, I don't know. But yeah, it is finicky. Getting it in the right spot on the phone and all of that, we don't even go there. All right, thank you.
You mentioned that on your managed devices you have CrowdStrike, but 60% of the devices are not managed. So what do you do as far as endpoint protection? How many different products do you have to check for, and do you also check version numbers of those products?
So that's it's an interesting question because we were talking about it yesterday. So one of the most important things was to include the Information Security Office risk and compliance team in all of this. So we didn't depend on the IAM team to have to make these types of risk decisions. They vetted the default list of allowable endpoint protection and decided they were all fine. Any one of those we will accept. Duo has since started to add tools there that we don't necessarily support. Like we noticed that the Proofpoint DLP agent will count as endpoint protection, and that's not good enough for us. So we actually are getting explicit with which ones we will support. At Yale, we are licensed to put CrowdStrike on any Yale-owned machine. So this only becomes an issue. And the help desk does have a mechanism. If you manage your own device, we can get CrowdStrike on it. The BYOD is an interesting one. I don't think any of the people who have onboarded yet are trying to use their home device, but they will have to go and buy something that is in the list in order for them to be able to use it. Like I've been enrolled for a long time, and I forgot and tried to check my email on my wife's computer, and it wouldn't work. I even downloaded the Duo desktop and then realized, oh wait, she's not running any endpoint protection.
Okay, got it. Yep. Thanks.
Question about your rollout. On one of the slides you had a map of your deployment stats, of your deployment path. And in step 3, you had identify early adopters and influencers. I'm curious how you went around doing that and how much of an impact they had on making adoption easier and gaining support within your target group.
Yeah, I think the real answer is I don't know. I believe we told finance, hey, we need the champions, and they delivered those. And then as far as what internally happened amongst the finance people, I don't know.
So I was actually in more of those conversations. So they gave us a list of 150 people who had a level of access to Workday that they were uncomfortable with. We said we're not going to pilot 150. So we said, give us a list of 30 who are both high risk and willing to do this, right? And so I actually had a conversation. The CFO handed off to the controller to do this, and I had a conversation with her, and I explained all of this, like, don't give me the people who sit around complaining about their computers all day. Don't give me the people who aren't willing to try something new. So that was a real collaboration with that unit. Now it helped that the CFO was like, "You're all doing this." Okay. But there was, I seem to remember there being one person. There was one person who was like abusive to our staff, who was, did not want any part of this. And 1 out of 33 is not bad in a research university. So, and we did, I think, follow up with the leadership there and say, listen, you gotta make sure that these people are on board. But that is the big challenge.
All right, thank you very much.
No problem. I think we got one more question, and then we're happy to take them offline.
So I think it's related, similar to the previous question that was asked. Is it possible to add things to that pre-check validation as opposed to just kind of checking or excluding the things that they already had available on their list of pre-checks for what's there, right? Because endpoint protection, great, I mean, you have to have it, but we also have to have other things on there like our vulnerability assessment agents or our kind of event monitoring agents, some other elements that we want to make sure are on our endpoints.
So, I mean, this is
I think you're going to have to, in our case, because we use Duo, we would have to have a conversation with Duo and say, hey, Cisco, please add these extra pieces to it.
Okay, so it didn't just pop out of something that was available to do.
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that there's, like I said, the DLP agent appeared as one of the things it's checking. And so we started off just saying, if it's in the list of agents, we're okay. And now we're realizing that actually we're gonna have to get specifics. I think some of those other like Nessus agents and things might be on the list, and I'm completely making that up, so somebody could correct me. But that's where I would expect to see it. I would expect them to put agents in there, and then you gotta decide which ones.
And I would say, and not to get too technical, but even Duo Desktop only checks, like on Windows, it only checks the Windows internal WMI, whatever's reported there. So if you've got tools that don't actually report as endpoint tools, they won't show.
So thank you, I appreciate your time. We'll let the audio guys go have their lunch, but John and I will hang around if you have any more questions.